As I'm sure you'll be aware, Garry Kasparov and Nigel Short played a blitz and rapid play match last weekend in St. Louis, and this exhibition match was to publicise the launch of a grand tour of tournaments. The super tournaments of Norway Chess, the Sinkfield Cup and the London Chess Classic are being bound together in this grand tour, this Grand Prix of tournaments. Anyway, it's fascinating to see the return to chess of Garry Kasparov after 10 years. He actually retired from active play in 2005, and I don't imagine that this is a full return to active play by Kasparov. It's not classical chess, but is a kind of one-off exhibition match. But it's clear that Kasparov is still heavily involved in the chess scene and really loves his chess, and somehow for me it wasn't surprising that he was lured back. I'm going to look at the second rapid play game. Now, the time control is 25 minutes on the clock for all the moves, and each time they made a move they would get 10 seconds added, so 10-second increment per move. That's a big help for Kasparov. That really helps him manage the time. If you're not match fit, then it makes life a lot easier. Of course, Nigel Short is match fit. He's still very much an active player. He's almost 50 years old, but still very much active on the chess scene. He'd just come back from Thailand, where he was playing in an open tournament, which he won. So he was rather tired, but still a very active player. Now, Kasparov in this game played his favourite Najdorf variation, and that's one of my favourite openings as well. Short played g3. Now this is quite a solid move. You might recall in Shamkir, Nishikori played e6 against Michael Adams. That leads to Scheveningen formations. But Kasparov played the classic Najdorf move, e5, driving the knight from the centre and establishing this strong pawn chain. The knight comes back. a4 prevents b5, an expansion on the queen side, and the bishop comes to b7. So you can see that this bishop and the knight already put pressure on white's centre, and that's one of the reasons behind playing g3 and bishop g2. That helps to bolster white's centre. This is quite a long game. I'm going to have to go through these moves quite quickly, but you can see that black has the classic Najdorf setup of pieces, and now play starts on the c-file as usual. Now knight d2. This is such a typical manoeuvre in this kind of position. You can see that the pawn structure is relatively fixed in the centre, so having stabilised this pawn, this knight now will bounce round to e3, hoping to gain great control over d5, and on a good day come into f5. I've actually had this position myself as black, and here I played rook c5, and the idea is to meet knight f1 with queen a8. I rather like this manoeuvre actually, that puts more pressure on e4 and covers the d5 square as well. But Kasparov played h5, a very aggressive move. It's not untypical in the Najdorf to play this move. You can get away with it because actually the centre is relatively closed, and that means that the king is actually fairly safe in the middle of the board. So it's not as though Kasparov is burning his bridges by playing this move, and he wants to perhaps get some attack down the h-file. Now white has a dilemma here. Very often this happens when your opponent advances the h-pawn. Do you block it with h4, but that could leave the g4 square a little weaker, or do you play h3, but problem is then that leaves this square slightly vulnerable, so this knight might bounce in here at some point, or do you ignore it? I think Short did okay here. I think ignoring it is alright, because there is no particular threat to checkmate white on the h-file when there is a strong bishop on g2. So Short just continued with his manoeuvre, putting the knight on this excellent square. Now it's looking at d5 but also f5, and that's why Kasparov played g6 covering f5. And here white would very much like to occupy d5, but now we can see one of the points of playing the rook to c8. Black can simply capture this, and now in an ideal world you would want to recapture with the queen, but that leaves c2 on prise. That's why rook e2 was played, so that white now threatens to play the knight into d5. Kasparov exchanged on g3, and now he played a classic Najdorf exchange sacrifice. I really like it when black does this. Shatters the queenside pawns. You can see they're all split now, and weakens white's hold over these squares, and means, of course, that black is able to take the pawn on e4 straight away. Well, this kind of sacrifice, not exactly in this position, but this kind of sacrifice has been seen so often in the Sicilian. Black has superb compensation. And it also means that somehow black's pieces are joining up with a potential attack on the king side. Threat, knight takes pawn, so bishop b2. Now there are many moves. Kasparov played knight f6, that seems good. c4 from short, he's trying to use this bishop. And now here the move I like is queen a8. I think that would be very strong, and you know, there's the possibility to play knight g5, and this attack looks already extremely dangerous. But instead Kasparov played queen c8, so he was still looking at perhaps the chance to get the queen down here, and in some cases. But now short started to find his feet. Knight d5 is a good move. Black really has to exchange off, and that straightens out white's pawns, and also now the knight has to move. It loosens black's grip over the centre. So the knight swung to g5. So, you know, Kasparov is still angling for some kind of attack here in some way. But short is recovering, no doubt about it. He wants to play the pawn forward to a5 to break up the queen side and possibly even get his central pawns rolling as well. So that's why a5 was played. I think that's necessary and a good move. But short has counterplayed because that pawn is potentially weak. Rook c1 covers the c pawn, and queen b3. There we go. So you can see that Kasparov has to pay attention, but he swings over to the king side. This was his big intention with playing the queen to c8. But the king is actually relatively secure with the bishop still on g2. Of course, the queen threatens the rook, so rook c2 was played. And now bishop c8. The bishop is doing nothing on a6. Here, of course, it's tempting for white to capture on b6. The problem is the queen is now really offside, and, well, I would say that black has at least a draw here. If the king running into the centre is too dangerous, so, well, black could possibly play for a win there, but he has at least a draw. But short played much better. He played f4, and now we're reaching the kind of crisis moment in the game. So you can see that short is really recovering here. Check and king f1, so that can't be taken because of the pin. So Kasparov has to be a little bit careful here. And now the queen swung over to the king side. So short's king is still alright here. Kasparov avoided an endgame. And now I think the clearest here is to bring that bishop back to c1, which covers some useful squares here. It means that knight is somewhat stuck out on h3. Instead, short played his rook to e4, which is slightly odd, putting his rooks here, because clearly black is not going to trade that pawn on e5. And again, bishop c1 I think is a reasonable move. But, you know, short's moves maybe not the most accurate here, but he still has a decent position. So they've reached an endgame where black has one pawn for the exchange, but as so often in the Najdorf, black has a strong pawn centre. Here, if short had found rook h2, I don't think this is an easy position for black. The idea is that here you can just play king g2 and put more pressure on the knight and on this pin on the h-file. I think white still has a good position there. Instead, short chose a rook h4, which in some ways is quite a principal move. If you're the exchange up, certainly you would like to exchange rooks. The problem is here it allows that knight to bounce back into play. And after this move, black has such a grip on the position. These minor pieces, see that black has total security on the queen side. That knight is superbly placed. The bishop is flying in all directions. The problem is for white, there is no decent plan. And ultimately, black is going to advance these connected passed pawns in the middle. Again, classic Najdorf strategy. Black has a majority of pawns in the centre of the board, and that so often is such an asset. Short was struggling here. He played d6. He's trying to get counterplay, but this was a clear mistake. I think it's an extremely difficult position, but this is just a losing move actually, because after this, bishop b4 wins back the exchange, and it's all over. And here, this is very accurate. You could take that rook, but that allows some kind of counterplay here. You can see, I mean, I think this is winning for black, but white, white has a bit of counterplay. Instead, great play from Kasparov. He did not take that rook. Instead, he just brought the bishop round so that he can take that pawn. And actually, that rook has absolutely nothing to do here. Kasparov's play, excellent. Now this is a winning position. The pawns start to advance, but here, short of time, Kasparov was too eager. He blundered. He played e4. Well, you could play almost any other move and black is just winning. But e4 is a mistake which short failed to exploit. He could have now taken on e4, and after this, you win back the bishop, and this should be a draw. But short missed it. He played the bishop back to h1, and now we're back on track again. Black's position is untouchable here. Let's just go through the final few moves. It's such an unpleasant experience for white. Now, short gave back the exchange, but it really doesn't make any difference to the position. And now Kasparov simplified. Exchanging pieces, he's still 2 pawns up, and here, after f4, short resigned. Well, the king will come in to support the pawn and take white's last pawn. Is completely lost. That was the final game of the match, which Kasparov won 8.5, 1.5, completely convincing. I have to say, short, well, he admitted afterwards that he just collapsed. He was incredibly tired. He was suffering from jet lag. He hadn't had the best week, by his own admission. I feel very sorry for him, actually. But one thing is, you know, Kasparov was saying, oh, this is my comeback after 10 years. But, you know, I've never known Kasparov go in for any kind of chess competition which he didn't think he could win. He will have been practicing his blitz beforehand, and he's still mightily strong. I'm going to go through perhaps one more game from this match, so do look out for that. And if you're interested in learning more about the Najdorf, then do check out my DVD, A Repertoire for Black with the Najdorf Variation. Thanks.